listen, the struggle was not red. I experienced it, being deprived, being oppressed, even confused. It's enough now, we're taking the power back. We're stronger than before, we're prouder, too strong. The worst is over. From Cape to Cairo, our Morocco to Madagascar. From Cape to Cairo, our Morocco to Madagascar.
Good afternoon, viewers in Azania, on the continent and in the world, and our African comrades in the diaspora. Welcome to AZAPO online webinar series. My name is Gaontebale Nodoba. I'm the Secretary for Publicity and Information of AZAPO, and I'll be playing host to two distinguished scholars this afternoon who are going to help us navigate a very difficult but topical issue: the Russia-Ukraine conflict, economic, trade, and political implications for Azania. I have a comrade professor, I will call him comrade professor, because on this platform this afternoon, he's wearing the cap of AZAPO Secretary for Foreign Affairs, and that is Professor Rothney Tshaka. He is a professor of systemic theology and ethics. He is also the director of the School of Humanities in the College of Human Sciences at the University of South Africa, abbreviated as UNISA. So Comrade Tshaka will be giving us the context of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and maybe then I have Professor Everisto Benyera, who is a professor, an associate professor of African politics in the Department of Political Sciences at the University of South Africa in Tshwane, Pretoria. So him and Professor Rothney are colleagues. Professor Everisto holds a doctorate in African politics from UNISA, and he has worked and researched in a number of countries, to mention three or so, or four: Zimbabwe, South Africa, Namibia, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Now, he teaches undergraduate classes in understanding political behavior and participation and understanding what we call the state. Now, he has researched in a number of issues, and maybe one will not get too much into that, but suffice to say that he is the editor of the journal Polité, the Journal of Political Sciences and Public Administration. Now, he has written a number of books, and I just want to share with you viewers quickly the publications that he has. It's important that I do this because one of them is particularly relevant, and that is the one that is forthcoming, that will be published this year, a month or two or three from now. That is that book is titled "The International Criminal Court in Africa, Decolonizing Global Justice," and that is coming out later on this year. And then we've got another one that is an editor there on it as well, the 2022 one, "Africa and the Fourth Industrial Revolution, a Curse or a Cure." Very important. And this one that he just showed me earlier on, before we went on air, we went live. It's a 2021 publication, "The Fourth Industrial Revolution and Re-Colonization of Africa, Coloniality of Data." Very interesting. Then a 2021 where he's also edited another one in 2020, "Breaking the Colonial Contract, From Oppression to Autonomous Decolonial Futures." Then another one, 2020, "Reimagining Justice, Human Rights and the Leadership in Africa, Challenging Discourse in searching for alternative paths, and finally, indigenous, traditional, and non-state transitional justice in Southern Africa, basically focusing on Namibia and Zimbabwe. Now, those are my guests, and I say to them a hearty welcome, professors, and we are now at this moment going to hand over, but before we do that, our guest, Professor Benyera, will now then get into giving us his views on this particular topic. And in particular, he also talked something that I think he might share about Azania and geographical locations, whatever. Found it very interesting. But he'll give us the perspective as a scholar who does political studies, but also international politics. He will then be able to take us through his thoughts on the idea. So once we are done, we'll now then engage with both speakers, and later on we'll allow members of the audience to also participate. Comrade Tshaka, Mkhaya, over to you. You are mute, Comrade Tshaka.
I see that. Thank you very much, Mkhaya. I want to thank you for your kind introduction. I also would like to really thank my colleague, Professor Benyera, for agreeing to the request that we have this conversation, which I believe is quite timely, quite relevant in the time that we find ourselves. And so what I am going to do is just really maybe to create the context in which we are having this conversation, and then we'll defer to my colleague to speak to the subject. But I think, to the members listening to this conversation and all who are connecting through the various platforms, it is very important that I say the context that we are about to have with regards to this enraging war between Russia and Ukraine is also a context that asks that we look at how we relate to one another in South Africa and in Africa. So there is greater need to speak about the impact that this war will have on the world, but more importantly, the impact that this war will have on Africa, and more specifically on Azania. And the conversation that probes this impact is at the same time, in my opinion, a conversation that happens on the throes of Black South African responses to a nervous condition that I believe was brought about by the failure of a liberation struggle towards the humanization of a people that was for the longest time subjected to inhuman conditions. The consequences of this, we have seen, or we have been warned by the likes of Albert Memmi in his The Colonizer and the Colonized, Frantz Fanon, The Wretched of the Earth, Valentin Mudimbe, Walter Rothney, and the list is just endless. This nervous condition has made it easy to seek out the Black African brother and sister who are seen to be competing with the scant resources made available for South Africans. It is significant that this aspect gets attention, because failing that would mean that our conversations of what is happening to the African in the diaspora cannot be seen as an isolated matter of how we deal with this question on our own shores in South Africa. It would seem to me, therefore, that the greatest threat to Black humanity is a system of politics and economics that has remained untransformed, chiefly because it has allowed some Blacks into it. And I want to pause here a minute and just reflect on a recent development in the European Union, where they have decreed that all Ukrainians would actually be allowed to be assimilated in Europe and would then be exempted from all the kinds of requirements that refugees and people fleeing from their own conflicting situations are subjected to. And we see also quite interestingly that these conditions do not apply to the Palestinians, for instance, or many African brothers and sisters who are in Europe and fleeing from very terrible conditions on the continent. A second point also that I think is important for us to give context to this conversation is that there are perennial attempts at shutting us up when we insist on the particularity of the Black condition. And this is so because being unapologetically Black and insistent on a historical past that had subjected Blacks to the kind of inhumanity that they are being subjected to as a group irritates those who were and continue to remain impervious to those circumstances. Thus, to insist that the conditions of exploitation that led to hunger and squalor, which had consequently become synonymous with us Blacks, are not divinely ordained determinations, but in fact are man-made conditions, has become so controversial today that parts of the USA had elevated critical race theory to a level similar to that of Nazism in Germany. The Black person speaking up has always been threatened with silence, and this is so that the defenders of this inhumane system know very best how to hire out from the leadership of the masses. It is then these Black leaders who become spokespeople for the very hegemonies that continue to exploit Black life. It is therefore not by chance that the kind of leadership or the kind of Black leadership that we have in this world today is likened by the likes of Louis Farrakhan as Black leaders looking like mannequins in the shopping malls of democracy. Now, while these mannequins are wearing the clothes that we dream of or that we desire to wear, these mannequins are ultimately mute because the mannequin does not talk and it does not work. And this muteness of our African leaders was noticed sharply when African leaders were presented with an opportunity of voting for and against this war in Ukraine. One could not but be reminded of Peter Pan's Perpetual Children, which reminds us that African leaders seem to have no ability or no inclination to want to grow up from their eternal infantilization in the interest of their countries and that of their people. So a context of our conversation on that war, which is quite clearly going to have dire consequences on us, must be a conversation also that takes into account what we as Black brothers and sisters have been doing or are not doing to ensure that the question of unity or Black unity becomes more than mere rhetoric. And it cannot be a conversation, in my opinion, Professor Benyera, that happens without us having to say something about what is happening right here on our doorsides. And so that is why I am hoping that with these few words that I have been saying, some of the key points that I have tried to underline, that we will also try to weave them through the conversation that we're going to be having, so that if at all we allow for some people to engage with the presentation, it would be a presentation that is holistic, because it is more than simply only focusing on the war, but focusing also on what we are doing or not doing as people of Azania and of the African continent with regards to those many challenges that seem to be particularly pointed towards Black communities. And I would like now with you, Mkhaya, to pause at this point and to defer to our professor to speak to us, hoping that the issues that I think are quite important or that should also be reflected in our discussion maybe are stated quite clearly. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Comrade Tshaka, Prof. At this moment, we will hand over to Professor Everisto Benyera to now then take us through the issues, and then later on we'll engage with the input of both speakers. Prof?
Thank you very much, Comrade Nodoba. Thank you very much, Professor Rothney Tshaka. Thank you to everybody who is listening. Thank you for taking your time and allowing me to share my views with you. Professor Tshaka, thank you very much for the very generous introduction. That was very kind of you, and also to the Director of Programs. You spoke about the Black condition. Indeed, the Black condition is not a divine creation, but it is a creation of the white race. It is one that created the bifurcation that we are struggling with today in the world. African greetings to you all. As an African, I am obliged to introduce my discussion with you this morning through an African story. This is a story that is told all over Africa. It's about the story of an eagle and a bird that is called the drongo, the long-tailed, the fork-tailed drongo, Nengure in Shona. So in the bird kingdom, the owl was the ruler, and the owl ruled by terror. And the terror of the owl as an instrument of statecraft was based on the dangers that would be dispensed on anybody descending through the horns of the owl. So if you dare oppose the orders of the owl would go you with those big horns. There came a day that the birds were tired of being dictated upon, of the double standards of being ordered around by the owl. And the fork-tailed drongo decided on an apparently suicide mission, which was to attack the owl. The fork-tailed drongo went straight for the horns, plowed into the horns with its beak, only to discover that the owl had no horns, but rather these were feathers that are shaped like horns. This is a very important story that will have resonance to what I am going to share with you today. And basically, what I am going to tell you today, to share with you today, is that as Africa, we are not yet liberated. And where is the evidence? We see the evidence in Deep Sloot, we see the evidence in Operation Dudula, we see the evidence in the Dubula movement, we see evidence in a person being designated as an undocumented illegal immigrant. And one is forced to pose a question: at what point did the human movement constitute a crime? How can an African being, a whole being, be designated as an illegal entity in Africa? At what point did we start labeling each other as illegal and therefore a moving crime simply because you were born on the other side of the river? Ukraine and Russia, these are neighbors that have been at each other's case for a very long time. And their relationship today, which is bellicocious, which is a war, is going to frame my argument, which is that due to coloniality, a war anywhere has worldwide implications. So no matter where the war occurs geographically, because of global interconnectedness, both voluntary and forced, that war will have repercussions anywhere and everywhere in the world, including Africa and including in Azania. What we are facing today, I want to argue that this is a low-level, low-intensity, multi-front, and others are calling it a third world hybrid war because of the many countries and the multiple fronts that are fighting in this conflict. I am happy today that I am addressing my colleagues in Azania. This is what the director of ceremonies was alluding to, that I am going to make a very simple but very important distinction between two mutually exclusive entities, Azania and South Africa. We are in a country called Azania, and Azania is located geographically in South Africa. So South Africa is a geographical location. South Africa is geography. Azania is a country. So as long as we continue to be officially recognized as South Africa, the United Nations and elsewhere, it means Azania has not yet arrived, because the two cannot mutually exist in the same territory. This territory will one day be called Azania. And the evidence that we are not yet Azania is there for all to see, which is the condition of the black body. I address you, comrades, today on the anniversary of Chris Tembisile Hani, one of the leading comrades in the liberation of Africa, up there together with Thomas Sankara and Patrice Lumumba. It is with a very heavy heart that I tell you that Comrade Hani must be turning in his grave because of what the comrades that are running this country are doing. Unemployment is at its highest. Inequality is at its highest. But never mind those Eurocentric markers. As African scholars, what we are concerned with is the quality of life. For me, human rights is not about how many newspapers are there in your community, how many television stations are there. Human rights is to be born, to live, and to die a life devoid of humiliation. That is what human rights mean from an African perspective. Are our people living a life devoid of humiliation when they are being called undocumented and illegal in their own country, Azania? You go to Deep Sloot, the living conditions of the people. You go to any so-called informal settlement. Look at the housing, the water, the basic necessities of life that the state is failing to provide to its people. Then we say, Comrade Hani, what you fought for is actually drifting very far apart because some of us have been co-opted into the system. Instead of representing us, they are now being a stumbling block between us and the human rights that we fought for. Where is the evidence for this argument that I am going to put forward, especially that a war in one part of the world affects every corner of the world? Western hegemonies are forcing countries to take sides. You are forced to side with the West, NATO, and Ukraine, or you are assumed to be on the side of the Russian Federation. And I am saying to you, comrades, today, as Azanians, we must be on the side of peace. We must tell the Europeans, NATO and its allies, the Ukrainians, and we must tell the Russian Federation that there is a third way, which is that of negotiation, mediation, and peace. This idea that neutrality is criminalized, that if you are neutral, you are siding with the aggressor, is a wrong conceptualization pushed forward by those who have never been in a situation like we are in South Africa. Neutrality allows you to reach to both sides of the conflict, and this will actually end the suffering of the many women and children in Ukraine. By the way, I titled my sharing today, if Europeans can do this to each other, what about to one of us? The implications of their war on us. It is their war, it is their problem, but it is affecting us. I always debate with my colleagues in the academia each time they bring up the notion of the so-called World War I, World War II, and how we are about to enter a World War III. And I say to them, colleagues, the so-called First World War was actually a Euro-North American war. The so-called Second World War was a Euro-North American and Japanese and whoever, but not us. As Africans, we did not volunteer to enter and fight into that conflict because we were denied of our sovereignty due to the Berlin Conference and the subsequent colonization of Africa. So it was never a world war, it was their war. And similarly, this is a war between two East European neighbors, which will have very serious repercussions for us in Africa and in Azania. This war we are witnessing today is what I have characterized as a low intensity, multi-front, hybrid war. It can sound a mouthful, but what it basically means is that it is no longer a war that is only fought on the battlefront, but there are so many fronts that are being fought where this war is being fought. There is the political front, and then there's the conventional war where they are bombing each other and whatever. And then the war is also being fought on a cultural front. Then there is the cyber warfare that is also going on. And the most important one for us is the media warfare. Not only fake news, but the use of brute power to say from today onwards, you are no longer going to watch Russia Today, you are no longer going to listen to Sputnik radio because their narrative is not what I want you to listen, not what you want to listen to, but what I want you as German to listen to. And then you must continue listening to CNN, Cable News Network, British Broadcasting Corporation, Al Jazeera, but you are not allowed to access an alternative view. Then I ask a question. Why does the British Broadcasting Corporation use their taxpayers' money to broadcast in more than 40 languages? Why are they doing all this with more than 400 radio stations? What is the idea behind spending public British money in broadcasting BBC Hausa, BBC Fulani, BBC Pashtun? It is because war is now not just about killing the opposition, but also killing their episteme, killing their thought processes, so that they don't think for themselves, they don't think from where they are, they don't think about themselves, but we are basically located in Africa, but thinking from the West. And this is the war that is being peddled through this media warfare. Then there is the diplomatic warfare and what we'll call lawfare, which is the use and abuse of the law to fight a war. You bend the rules in order to suit yourselves and in order to harm and hate your enemy. Colleagues, comrades, what is ensuring today is not the rule of the law, but it is rule by the law. You make the law an instrument of governance, not an instrument of delivering human rights. This is my argument to you today, and this is the brief evidence that, that is there. A complex conflict like what is happening in Ukraine today is shaped by where one begins the narrative. Where one begins a narrative automatically preempts the conclusion. You can start the narrative of Africa as a failed state. Or you can start the narrative of Africa as a continent, as a country that was being rendered ungovernable through the arbitrary division of many nations and then putting them into one state. Where do you begin a narrative? And what determines where you begin a narrative? Let me give you examples here. One can begin the narrative of the Russia-Ukraine war when the Soviet Union was formed in 1922. Or you can even go before 1922 and go to 1917, the Bolshevik Revolution. And when Crimea was given to Ukraine by Stalin. Or you can go back when the Cold War ended in 1991. If you want, you can start this narrative of the war today when NATO grew its members from 12 in 1949 to the current where NATO has got 30 members. And the obvious question is, at whose expense did NATO grow its members from 12 to 30? Alternatively, you can start this narrative in 2014 when Russia annexed Crimea. Or did it annex Crimea, or it reclaimed Crimea, which it had lost in 1917 as a result of the Bolshevik Revolution. Some will want to begin this narrative when the Russian Duma voted to recognize the two Ukrainian regions of Donetsk and Luhansk when they wanted to be independent regions. So where do you start a very complex narrative like this, or any other narrative for that matter? And why do you begin there? You are beginning this narrative of this comrade as an undocumented illegal immigrant. That is where you decide to begin the narrative. But you do not want to begin the narrative when his original home was rendered part of the British Empire. And it was rendered an extroverted economy, an economy which does not serve the black race, an economic system that is entirely anti-black. By the way, somebody asked me, Professor Benyera, what is the work of a professor? And I said to them, the work of a professor is twofold. Firstly, a professor simplifies complicated things. And secondly, a professor simplifies complicated things. So we simplify complicated things and we complicate very simple things. Let me complicate the idea of perspectives. If you place a piece of paper on the ground, ask 4 comrades to stand on the 4 sides of that paper. The first comrade will see a number 3. The second comrade will see a letter E. The third comrade will see the letter W, and the last comrade will see the letter M. Here are 4 comrades standing on the same geographical location at exactly the same time, looking at exactly the same piece of paper with the same inscription, but they are seeing 4 perspectives. In fact, one of them is seeing a numerical perspective. You say, comrades, this is a 3. From where I am standing here, I am seeing a number 3. Then the other comrades will say, no, there's something wrong with you. From where we are standing, this paper has got an alphabet letter. But the 3 comrades will then go ahead again and disagree with themselves, because while they are all seeing a letter, but they are seeing different letters, an E, a W, and an M. This is the best way of depicting our perspective as people in AZAPO of what we are seeing in Ukraine. And nobody should force us to see an E when we are seeing a 3, because here we are still living not with the aftermath of colonial apartheid, but we still live with apartheid and we still live with colonialism. So from what we are seeing, what is happening in Ukraine is that in the midst of a war where Ukrainians are running away from Russian bombs, they have the time and the intellect to be racist, to deny the blacks, the students, the Indian students that are there to board the train and escape from the same enemy. We see a lot of hypocrisy and double standards by Europeans. When Syrians were running away from Russian aggression in Syria, Poland and Hungary erected fences. They put, they sent the army there. It was basically a no-go area for the refugees that were running away from Syria. I remember watching Al Jazeera, an old woman from Romania saying, I would rather burn my old blankets than give them to Syrian refugees. A lot of Syrian refugees died of hypothermia on the border there while they were not allowed to cross into Poland. Fast forward today, the Ukrainians are running away from the same Russians. They arrive at the same border. What is there? Every NGO is there, the president is there. There is even Mozart, there is piano, there is all the sonatas, they are being played. They are being integrated into the Polish society effortlessly. You ask a question, what was the difference between the Syrian refugees and the Ukrainian refugees? You hear even the Western journalists saying, but these are not a security threat. They've got blue eyes like us. They are civilized. These are our neighbors. These are Europeans. So the idea of an immigrant, the idea of a refugee is not only one that is shaped by your existential threat that you'll be running away, but it is one that is formed by your race. This is what we call an epidemic passport, that the color of your skin becomes a passport. These are the double standards that we have always spoken about, which Europe and America can no longer hide. Madeleine Albright was asked, 1 million children died in Iraq as a result of the NATO operations in Iraq. Was it worth it? She said, yes, it was worth it. Today, we witness the height of double standards. The United States invaded more than 10 countries in the past. It invaded Afghanistan, it invaded Iraq, it is supporting Israel in invading Palestine. It led to the invasion, it led during the invasion of Libya. I can go on and on and on and on and on. And then they have the guts now to ask us as Africans to support them in condemning Russia for invading Ukraine. How about your support of Israel when it is invading Palestinians? This is why I agree with the view put forward by Professor Tshaka in his generous introduction about the perpetual infantization of Africa, where the West looks at Africa as a perpetual infant, an ideological infant, a capitalistic infant, somebody who is endowed with natural resources but who does not know how to use them and who is not entitled to use them. This is why they loot the Congo day and night. We should stand up and speak about what we see from our perspective based on our history and our lived experience. This is what is happening there, colleagues. I need not explain that because we can all see what is happening to the EU and the United States and what is happening to Russia. It is a mutually hating, not stalemate, because the war is moving left and right, positive and negative, but it is a mutually hating situation where one is being economically hit and the other is having energy, gas and oil being used as an instrument of diplomacy. Colleagues, let me get straight into the political implications of what is happening in Ukraine. The first and major implication is the revival of geopolitics, politics of wanting to control certain geographical regions. And this is happening in a United Nations that is divided. The United Nations General Assembly is divided. The United Nations Security Council, permanent 5 members, are also divided. China and Russia on one side, and then the other Western nations on one side. Sadly, Africa is also divided. So is our region, so is our country, and so is the ruling party. So we see a lot of division occurring across many political entities at a time when we expected unity. The second political implication is that, contrary to what others like Francis Fukuyama have opined, that history has ended. Actually, this is not the end of history. Ideological contestations are not yet over, as they are the major instrument for the conflict that is occurring today. Russian nationalism and Western political values are at a clash in a geography called Ukraine. And the implications for us here is that Africa once again is going to be a theater for proxy wars. I am not talking about a gun-based conventional war. I am talking about a hybrid war. It could be an economic war. It could be a cyber warfare. it could be news-based or law-based, because in this century, the type of warfare has moved away from conventional to something that is called a hybrid war. So we are going to see proxy wars in Africa. We are aware that Russia was removed from the SWIFT system, and that there are developments in Russia and China to develop an alternative international payment gateway, not only to rival, but to take the job that is being done by the Belgian-based SWIFT. Now, if you are going to do a transaction from South Africa, you want to send money in Ghana, you are suddenly confronted with two options: a Western option, which is SWIFT, and an Eastern option that is formed in Russia and China. And this is going to be the sort of bifurcation that is going to confront us going forward, I predict. Then the idea that the major countries will not go to war with each other because they have got nuclear deterrence, because they have got all sorts of multilateral organizations to talk to each other and avoid a direct confrontation, is over. We saw how Russia and Ukraine put all that aside, and then what then ensued is an all-out war being fought on many fronts. What this means is that for us in Africa, we are going to have a lot of conditionalities. There are a lot of countries that rely on Western aid to balance their books, what is called in economics the balance of payment and all those things. There are a lot of countries that still rely on aid from the West. That aid is going to be tied to new conditionalities that are going to be born from this Ukraine-Russia conflict. Who knows, maybe one of the conditions is that you denounce Russia and you swear that you will never have anything to do with Russia as a condition of receiving this aid from Japan, from Germany, or receiving these computers from France for a primary school somewhere in rural Africa. We are going to see more failed states in Africa. And these states are not failing out of their own volition, but they are failing as a result of the efficacy of coloniality. African states were rendered ungovernable by the way they were molded as colonial constructs. They were predisposed to fail, and this is going to be worse after the Russia-Ukrainian war. This will give rise to more regional insecurity. And lastly, on this part, comrades, allow me to talk about the increase in far-right politics and ultranationalism. We will see then the rise of negative phenomena such as racism, xenophobia, tribalism, and many others. Only on Friday, there was a police operation in Diepsloot. They got a young man who was wearing patapata, slippers, and they identified him, they profiled him, and they said he must be a foreign Shangana because he is wearing those patapata. When they confronted him, they asked him to pronounce the elbow in his language, Indololoan, Gokor, or whatever you call it. The young man, obviously frightened by so many law enforcement officers, home affairs, police, he could not pronounce the elbow in Tsonga. A certain police officer who was there then said, I am from Malamlele. This is not how we pronounce an elbow. You must be illegal, you must be undocumented. Where is your ID? The chap said the ID is at home with my aunt. They drove the police van, went there. I think most of you are aware of this story. I am just repeating it for those that might have missed it. How the state in Africa is very violent towards the black body. Where we expected the Home Affairs officials to be using a fingerprint machine to ascertain the legality of individuals, they are using language, they are using dialect as a form and method of determining the legality of citizens. This is why my argument to you today is that the state is the problem in Africa. This is what I alluded to when I said that Africa is divided. This is how we voted in the first round of the United Nations General Assembly resolution to condemn the war in Russia and basically ascribe culpability to Russia. The yellow countries abstained. The green countries voted in favor of the motion. Professor Tshaka, this could then be your mannequins. And then, sorry, and then the dark gray were not in the room. Only Eritrea was upfront and voted against the resolution. Out of all these countries, we are beginning to see geopolitics affecting African allegiances, African unity, to a point where some countries would rather be not in the room than abstain, vote for, or vote against. In my view, this is the beginning of the redivision of Africa along Eastern and Western alliance lines. Let me move on to the economic implications. The infrastructure of Ukraine has been razed to the ground. There's nothing to talk about in Ukraine. There is going to be a global recession. Of the 40 million citizens in Ukraine, 4 million of them left the country, and up to 6 million are internally displaced persons. What that means is that because Russia and Ukraine are at war, their normal contribution to global productivity has been removed. The wheat, the maize, and all other minerals that we get from Russia and Ukraine will either be drastically removed or they will no longer be there on the global balance sheet. What this means is that there will be poverty, hunger, and famine for Africa. The Horn of Africa basically lives on aid from such programs as World Food Organization. And that aid is grain that is grown in Ukraine, it is grain that is grown in Russia, and it is grain that will no longer be available to them. Another implication is that there is going to be an unprecedented arms race and weaponization of the space. Because this is a hybrid war, you look for new spaces where you can have a very competitive advantage. And one of that places is the space. We look at what the Russian Federation have achieved so far. They have constructed a bomb that is called the Saturn II. Saturn II. This is a game changer, and it is the reason why NATO is not willing to impose a no-fly zone on Russia. Because, just briefly, that bomb can travel half the circumference of the Earth. That bomb travels at about, if I'm correct, 6 times the speed of sound. It has got about 22 multiple re-entry missiles that can be independently targeted and recalled. So it's a very serious game changer. And NATO and the United States are busy responding. And what that means is that Africa is going to be ignored. We are not going to be part of the global discourse as each country looks inward to bolster its own economic and military power. We are going to have a lot of imported problems that are not ours. High fuel prices, wheat shortages, and a lot of other problems imported from the conflict. There is what is called the Foreign Legion. This is like a brigade of foreigners that are fighting in Ukraine. And I believe that there are some white South Africans that are fighting in that brigade. What will happen to those people after the end of the conflict? Radicalized, blood dripping with hands, and then they come back to South Africa as what? We are going to have serious problems of reintegrating former combatants that were fighting in a war that has got nothing to do with us. On the economic front, there is something that is called the Petrol Dollar. This is the fact that what gives the American economy its power, what makes America great, is nothing other than the fact that it is the currency that is used to trade petroleum globally. The moment that you delink the US dollar from petrol, from a barrel of crude oil, all these United States dollars that are circulating in the world will return home to the United States to an empty treasury at Fort Knox. The United States will have civil strife like never seen before. This is why the Colonel, brother leader Muammar Gaddafi, was killed, because he had started a program of selling African petroleum using a gold coin. Anybody who dares to challenge the petrodollar is assassinated. You look at the late Iraqi leader. He was gone precisely because he decided to sell Iraq oil in another currency other than the petrodollar. So what this means, the fact that Russia linked the ruble to the gold standard at 5,000 rubles to 1 ounce of gold, it means that the petrodollar for the first time has faced a real challenge to its existence. This will make the United States more desperate and more aggressive in its agenda to maintain its hegemony. Death of multilateralism. Multilateralism was based on the view that we all belong to the international community and that we are all ruled by the same international laws, international norms, and international principles. But when some begin to be more equal than others, then that regime collapses. Again, what we are going to see from a security perspective is that the need for more and new energy sources will increase attention on African sources of energy. There is liquefied natural gas in Cabo Delgado in Mozambique. A French company called Total Energies is the one that is leading the exploration and the extraction of liquefied natural gas from Mozambique. Already we saw the insurgency that was in Cabo Delgado. This has got serious repercussions for us as Azania because this is happening right next door. More liquefied natural gas was discovered in Tanzania. And the late President, Dr. John Magufuli, said, we are not going to start mining and extracting this liquefied natural gas until we develop our own capacity to extract, to purify, and to use. In other words, he did not want British Petroleum, BP. He did not want Total Energies or Caltex or Elf Aquitaine to come into Tanzania and extract that liquefied natural gas. So up to today, those reserves have not yet been tapped in. What does that mean, given that there is a new president in Tanzania? The possibility of bioterror and bioterror and biowar. When these things are perpetrated, they do not know any political limits. They do not know any political boundaries. They can reach any part of the world, and suddenly we are afflicted with diseases and deformities that were constructed in a conflict that we were not a part to. Colleagues, comrades, Director of Ceremonies, allow me to speak about the rise of non-state actors. we see in Africa the state being rendered a eunuch. A eunuch is a male who is not sexually reproductive. So this is what we are seeing the state becoming in Africa. It is a de facto state. It is a state that only exists in law, but in practical terms, that state, in Professor Tshaka's words, continues to be a perpetual infant. And we are seeing the rise of a technological oligarchy that has got the power to subtract and to negate whole political entities such as the African community. I can talk about just one of them, Meta, which is the one that owns Facebook, WhatsApp, and all these things. Facebook or WhatsApp has got billions and billions of subscribers, which makes the owner of that company, one Mark Zuckerberg, a very powerful global political player. Why? Because he can announce that from today onwards, we are changing the rules on hate speech. On Facebook, hate speech is now allowed only if it is targeted at Vladimir Putin and Russians. Double standards again. The tech oligarchy, which is rising, is usurping the sovereignty from the people and from the states and making itself the ultimate sovereign. Cryptocurrencies, they are rising above national banks, they are rising above ministries and governments, and they are operating in cyberspace, unregulated and unchecked. And then something that is very close to my heart is the work that is being done by private armies and mercenaries to destabilize the globe. There are some private armies that are believed to be domiciled in South Africa. These private armies are rising to be more sophisticated, more powerful, more connected, and more efficacious than national armies. What this means is that this feeds directly into unstable governments in Africa, because it then becomes a matter of who can afford to pay these mercenaries to remove that government. What are the opportunities for Africa emanating from the war in Ukraine? South Africa is, after Russia, the world's second biggest producer of palladium, and palladium is a very critical component in automobile electronics. We've got a huge chance there in South Africa to push up our productivity levels and prop up the rand so that at least our currency can be stronger on the basis of more exported palladium. South Africa, Russia, and Zimbabwe account for 90% of the world's platinum. It means we can come together as three countries. We can determine the price of platinum. This, by the way, is the stuff that gets into the nuclear bomb. So South Africa, Russia, and Zimbabwe can form the OPEC of platinum. And instead of selling their produce individually, they can then issue collective pricing regimes. I spoke about the issue of liquefied natural gas and oil and how we are a key supplier, and how instead of waiting for somebody to come and invest in our liquefied natural gas fields, let's build up local capacities. Sasol can go into Tanzania and begin to mine and share the proceeds with the Tanzanian people. This is what Julius Nyerere was talking about when he spoke to us about Ujamaa na Kilimo, agriculture and self-reliance. The self-reliance of Africans, not to rely on aid. At times as Africans, we ask for foreign aid for things that we even have in our own house, for things that we even have in our countries, because the idea that foreign is better was ingrained in us through colonial apartheid. Let's attract genuine investment to develop the gas fields in Cote d'Ivoire, Senegal, Tanzania, and Uganda, among other countries. And then there is a huge market for Africa's agriculture products. So it means there is a chance for us to revolutionize our agriculture. land reform, give the blacks the land, we learn to farm the land, we export the food to Somalia instead of waiting for a UN agency from New York to buy the grain from Russia and take it to Somalia. We can grow the food here and feed our own brothers and sisters. Program Director, it is my conviction that this is the right moment for us as Africa, for us as Azania, to push for the reform of the United Nations Security Council. If that fails, then the United Nations Security Council must be dissolved. Because if there is anything which this conflict has demonstrated, it is that the United Nations Security Council is useless. The United Nations itself, it's very useless. That the Security Council is there to provide security to its own member states and to no one else. This body is problematic. This body is a continuation of coloniality by other means. It must be reformed at least, and at best, it must be dissolved. Instead of thinking of an alternative within a problematic United Nations paradigm, how about thinking of an alternative to the United Nations? I repeat that again. Instead of thinking of an alternative within the United Nations system, which is problematic, how about us investing our collective intellect in thinking about an alternative to the United Nations system and say, this system is born out of war. This system is no longer working for all. Let's think of a new system. It's a challenge that I leave with you, colleagues. South Africa is a member of the BRICS, and South Africa is going to be called upon to play the role of a unifier because Russia is in the middle. Brazil voted against Russia. India voted in favor of Russia. South Africa abstained. So there is a real chance that if South Africa does not play its role as a unifier, BRICS as an economic bloc could actually face serious challenges as a result of the Ukraine-Russia war. Colleagues, this is an opportunity for Africa to push for economic sanctions to be declared an act of war, because economic sanctions are indiscriminate. You can call them targeted sanctions, you can call them whatever, but when they land here in Africa, when we receive economic sanctions in Zimbabwe, what we receive is utter brutality to a point where a country that is endowed with almost all the resources, platinum, palladium, gold, coal, you name it, does not have a currency. How does that sit with a country such as the United Kingdom? Not even one gold mine, but it is the most gold in its reserves. Economic sanctions must be declared an act of war because this is economic warfare. Colleagues, this is an opportunity to expose Western hypocrisies and double standards. They must be documented, they must be spoken about. The West must be told about how it is practicing double standards. Look at the number of journalists that are in Ukraine, yet there is no one in Yemen. If the NATO alliance went into Iraq because there were weapons of mass destruction, which they did not find, now they turn around, they are stopping Russia from getting into Ukraine for denazification. Doesn't Russia also have the same right to go in and check for the Nazis? And then if it does not find them, tough luck. You went into Iraq, you went into Afghanistan, you went into Libya. Today, Libya is a failed state, archetype failed states, 3 governments, 3 states, 3 parliaments, 3 leaders, and the West disappeared very quickly. This is why I am saying that as Africa, this crisis is an opportunity that has got the power to unite us. How about for Azania? What should we prepare for as a result of their war? There are going to be more episodes of human movements, especially from Mozambique, Angola, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. These three countries have some of the biggest reserves of liquefied natural gas, not only in Africa, but also in the world. As the world looks away from Russia, they must look towards something else. And that something else is Africa. That something else is Cabo Delgado, it is Cabinda in Angola, and it is Walikale in the Congo. We know the methods of Western extraction. They are ruthless, they are brutal, and our people will run away from their neighborhoods, seeking sanctuary in Azania. We are going to see a more popular African National Congress as a ruling party that is riddled with factionalism, as a ruling party that will lose most of its power. This will lead to very unstable coalition governments throughout the country. The phenomenon of coalition governments is just at the beginning. It will become the norm rather than the exception, because among others, the African National Congress is becoming popular each day. And I put in quotations here, small parties are going to be the power brokers. Parties that are deemed to be smaller for one reason or the other are going to be the power brokers in South African local and national governance going forward. So for me, this is the right moment to start developing coalition frameworks, to begin to identify like-minded organizations and say, should this happen, let's be prepared to work together. We are going to see an increase in anger among Black South Africans, We have seen that already with the likes of Operation Dudula and the Dudula movement. Just this afternoon, this morning around 10 o'clock, Operation Dudula was being launched in Durban, eThekwini. So this anger among Black South Africans is going to increase. However, the anger is not going to be directed at the right entities, but it is going to be directed at the weakest among us, who are the Black foreign nationals. So economic opportunities are going to dwindle in South Africa. There is going to be more civil unrest in South Africa. There is going to be more pressure on jobs, more pressure on healthcare, more pressure on housing. And all these will not be blamed on an unperforming government. They are not going to be blamed on a corrupt government, but they are going to be blamed on the weakest among us, who are the foreigners. Colleagues, thank you very much for the opportunity to listen to me. Thank you very much for the opportunity for me to share with you. I thank you, and I give back the microphone to the Director of Ceremonies.
Thank you very much, Professor Everisto Benyera. You can exit your slides now. Exit them so that we have another view. Thank you very much. You indeed shared a mouthful. We would want to hear what Professor Rothney Tshaka will want to say before I engage the two speakers, because Prof. Benyera kept on referring to you as well, Mkhaya. So if you can just come in about that concept of seeing the African state as an infant, and that constant refrain kept coming back. But also the idea of misdirected anger. Yes. And I know you had also, I don't know, was it in the week, last week, you also had a bite at the deep slot issue. Over to you, Mkhaya.
Absolutely. Thank you, Director. Thank you, Professor Benyera. I think first I must start by saying, Director, it was very intentional for me to allow Professor Benyera to really take the bigger chunk of this conversation, because first of his expertise in that, and secondly, because we as Blacks are not fond of acknowledging expertise among Blacks where that is needed. And that's why I figured, let me park a bit and allow for my colleague to speak to this matter, because I have read his works, and one of the biggest problems among us is not reading each other's work and citing one another. And that was the reason, basically, I proposed that he speak to us today. I think the point that he kept on coming back to is quite an important thing, in that if you look at where Black leadership is called upon to really do things in the interest of the people, you always find, almost suddenly, that we are relegated to children in a way, that we can't make decisions like adult and grown-up people will do. And that is because most of us are hired out. We might make our way to the platforms because we are speaking for the masses, but once we are seen, we are then hired out. People capture us, and we then become the spokespeople for the very hegemonies that continue to exploit our people. And I think, Director, we need to really begin to work towards conversations that are going to lead us to having covenants, that is, agreements and contracts with Black people. Now, anytime when that thing is said very strongly, you're already questioned and all kinds of things come your way. It is not popular to say, I am Black unapologetically anymore, because of the fact that everyone wants to be hired out. We readily avail ourselves to be hired out. And so we need to have a conversation among ourselves as Black people, like what is happening with regards to the Dudula things and in Black townships. These are things that are ganging up on Black communities. Why can't Black people collectively get conversations that are going to get us to, without the emotion, because it's a very emotive thing, without the emotion, get us to collectively speak about these issues. Director, I was working with guys elsewhere who are as much interested in dealing with the criminal elements in these things. And if you get foreigners who are here and who have seen the benefit of being here, working with communities, I'm telling you, we can get much mileage. White people are so fond of working the divisions among us, that these are kinds of things that get us to be distracted from what are the real issues. And my point is, the real issue is the nervous condition that is created by a lack of proper leadership here. We are nervous as South Africans. Were promised liberation, and it's quite easier to look at the Black foreigner, because the Black foreigner is not relegated to the camps that we have elsewhere in the continent or the world, but the Black foreigner is able to infiltrate Black communities. And again, the question of pigmentation, of demos that Professor Benyera speaks of, becomes an issue, because the white foreigner who comes from a troubling European country can be here and no one questions that you are here and depleting and competing with the scant resources, because you are seen as a white person coming to this country, you're contributing to the economy, and as a Black person coming here, you are seen as coming to compete for the scant resources that we have in this country. And so I want to appreciate my brother for really having lectured and really scoped us on this very important subject.
Okay, no, thank you very much. Before we go to his scope alignment, you also mentioned Professor Tshaka, then I'll go to the input by Professor Benyera. And at this stage, let me invite members of the audience to put their questions in the Q&A or in the chat. And then those that really have got an earth-shattering input to make, either in the form of the question to both speakers, will raise their hands and I will recognize them. Now, Comrade Tshaka, you talked about the type of leaders that we have, and I'm trying to check in my notes. You spoke about something like, as part of this nervous condition, them being in the shopping malls.
Yes.
You brought that concept.
Absolutely.
I would like you to unpack it in relation to what Professor Benyera raised in terms of the kind of new problems that are going to emerge, right? And also the kind of opportunities that we have that we need to also explore. To say, for instance, platinum producers that we are. If we club up with the other countries that you mentioned, Zimbabwe and Russia, we can be a force to reckon with. Palladium, for instance, there's also an opportunity, but we've got our leaders in the African continent, also even in the Southern African region, who are actually in the shopping malls, right? Those particular leaders who are, who seems to be apologetic, who are rented to be able to do certain things. But as Professor Benyera also said, they seem to be in the mute state or mode of not being able to pronounce and talk. And they also talk about the idea of neutrality, right? To say neutrality is being demonized, right? And he tried to show in his presentation argument. But all these things link to the issue that you raised of our leaders being in, it's an interesting concept for me, being in the shopping mall. Can you take us through that, Mkhaya?
You know, Mkhaya, I don't know when Gaontebale, how we grew up. You know, back in the days, we used to walk those streets and you'd see these mannequins, you know, having nice clothes on that you'd really want to wear. You know, you've got nice clothes and all of that, but a mannequin is just a mannequin. You know, it has this clothes, but it can't talk, it can't walk. It is just there. It is just a mummy there. And to a great extent, you see this also of our leaders. They have what we thought, you know, yes, if I was there, I probably would have done this, I would have done it. But this is the problem with us, in that we are mute, we are just dumb, we are just there, we're just mannequins. And so it speaks to the question of a void of proper leadership. And now the problem is, we also know that vacuums are filled, by anything. And so once there's a vacuum, you're going to see every kinds of things filling that. And we have never really, in this country, really had a conversation about that. Now, it cuts across sectors. It is not only in the police in this country, unfortunately. You see it in government and elsewhere that these vacuums of leadership are filled by anything that just passes by. The second point, which also was one that Prof. Benyera spoke of a lot, the question of xenophilia. Now, we know of xenophobia, but there's xenophilia, the love of anything foreign. And we know that also in academic sense, you know, if you get a PhD from Oxford or from elsewhere, you're perceived to be a proper scholar compared to someone who has not gone there. We have even parents encouraging our children to go and do some nonsensical study of a local thing here because it's at Oxford. As long as you've got a certificate that says University of Oxford. And so this is the problem of xenophilia, that we would have things here that we are best placed to be leaders in that, but we would prefer something that is foreign. And so the issue of us tapping together, you know, Russia, Zimbabwe, and South Africa with issues of what we're strong at could ultimately quickly be something, be organized, you know. But we are so busy with the divisions that we augment among ourselves, that we don't even see the opportunities that we have among ourselves. And so maybe it is about time that we have conversations, as I'm saying, that will lead us to begin to look into us, to tap into our own wells and see what it is that we can, you know, better place, or better work towards retaining or getting that positions that we want to get at.
Okay, no, thank you very much. Thank you. I would like to bring in Professor Benyera here, but I see his video is off and yours is also going off from Kaya. And as again, I'm inviting us of the audience to make their inputs, come with questions, so that we are then able to engage. Prof. Benyera, thank you very much for, let me say, for lack of a better expression, for an informative and provocative input, right? Intellectually provocative input. I had this idea of, I don't know whether they call it like that in economic terms. You call it the petrol dollar, what they call the de-dollarization that has happened now, and we have seen China and Russia clubbing together. And you then pointed out that South Africa has got an opportunity, an economic opportunity, to be able to get into that particular space, particularly because now the dollar might lose its power. Now, could you maybe just unpack a little bit and bring it to Azania to then say this de-dollarization or the petrol dollar, what implications at a practical level in terms of the day-to-day living of ordinary Azanians, what impact or implication does that have on the economic activity of the ordinary Azanian?
Thank you very much, Comrade Nodoba. The global economy very much runs on petroleum. This is why when the petrol prices in South Africa increase by R1, the price of everything almost goes up, from the taxis to the food to everything, because an increase in the price of fuel has got what is known as a ripple effect. In some cases, it even has got a multiplier effect. So contestations over the production of petroleum, the pricing of petroleum has got a direct impact on our daily lives, because it is the black race that stays in one geography and works in another area. Our food is produced in another province and it is transported by rail to another province. You look at a liter of milk from a farm where a liter of milk is produced in Quebec, it lives at R1.20. When it lands in your local supermarket, that liter of petrol of milk is R12.50. So we are going to be directly impacted economically because all the prices of basic foodstuffs are going to go up. All the prices of transporting, because we still live in a colonial system where I work in Pretoria, but my home is in Giyani, my home is in Hamasemola. So I must go there frequently. So it's either I stop going there or I don't know. So the way that we know life today for the black race in Azania is going to be much more complicated. The jobs that our people are getting, which by the way constitutes what in political economy is known as pseudo-employment. This is where the salary that you get does not even allow you to break even. Whereby working as a till operator, as a mine driller, you're actually subsidizing the company. You're actually subsidizing the shop where you are working. That is where about 60% of the black race is working. Then the other ones are in the informal sector. These are the people that are going to be impacted negatively by the impending increase in the price of petrol. As the war drags on, by the way, in my own estimation, the war is not ending anytime soon. It could not be surprising if we go into Christmas with this war, because the military objectives that were set out have not yet been met. So right now, it's a form of a stalemate. I foresee harsh economic times. I foresee very agitated and angry Azanians, angry at the lack of a proper leadership. Somebody who says, I will be the last one to eat, not the first one to eat, and then I throw away the leftovers.
Okay. No, thank you very much, Prof. I hear you, and I think one tends to agree with you. And the example that you made, which is within Azania, the geopolitics that we have, these fragments of balkanizing our country, I think it also exacerbates the problem. Balkanizing the country into provinces as well and so on, which is also a big problem. Now, you referred to the eunuch state, which based in Africa. Now, I'm trying to get to the issue again, to get into this particular matter of then say, in the short term, we are going, those are your predictions of the anger that is going to come up and so on. But in the short term, what can be done? And there is a question here that has come up from the audience. The member says, as you try to respond to this, does South Africa have an oligarch similar to that of Russia and China? Maybe
Thank you very much.
you can take us through that, Prof.
Thank you very much, Director of Programs. I briefly responded in the chat there, and I said, yes, South Africa has a huge oligarchy, large in terms of wealth, and it is predominantly a white oligarchy, but it has been joined by a very small number of blacks, and these blacks are only black in terms of their skin color, but their thought processes, their capitalist agenda, their capitalist dreams are all white. This is why also I argued that the most dangerous people in South Africa is the black middle class. It is dangerous because instead of using its vantage point to lift those that are below them, they're actually using their vantage point to aspire also to be tomorrow's bourgeoisies. But back to the issue of the eunuch state. The issue of the eunuch is well narrated in the Bible. I think it is where the Egyptian pharaohs would look for very strong men to look after their concubines. But in order to make sure that these very strong African men do not also enjoy what they were not supposed to be enjoying, they were castrated.
Yeah.
So you are looking after what you don't eat.
Okay.
Yes, I hope it makes a lot of sense. You are looking after what you don't eat as a eunuch. And this is what the African state is. I argue also in one of my books that the greatest mistakes of the liberation movement was to fight for the control of the state. Because the state is actually the problem. The state in Africa was created in order to manage the black race. So how do you fight for the control of a toxic instrument, one that was created to disadvantage you, to punish you, and to kill you, and you now want to preside over that instrument yourself, kill your own people, control your own people, dispense these toxic laws? So the biggest problem of the liberation movement in Africa was to fight for the control of the state. What were they supposed to do? They were supposed to fight for the removal of the state. Because the state was the problem. The colonial state, the one that we inherited at independence, was imposed on us in order to manage us together with the colonial borders. All those colonial boundaries. You see, there are Tsonga people in Zimbabwe, Tsonga people in South Africa, Tsonga people in Mozambique, Venda people in Zimbabwe, Venda people in South Africa. Tswana people in Botswana, in Namibia, in South Africa. How do you manage a state? How do you manage a nation that is in 3 states? You look at the Somali nation. The Somali people are in Somalia. The Somali people are in Kenya. The Somali people are in Eritrea. The Somali people are in Djibouti. How do you manage the Somali nation when it is in 3, 4, 5, 6 states? So the thing that we need to collectively challenge here is not one another, but the instrument that is being used to govern us, which is the state. If you allow me, Chairperson, the state in Africa is characterized by 4 things. Number 1, divide and rule. This is why the state says any form, are you black, are you white? Are you permanent resident, are you foreigner? Are you man, are you woman? Are you colored, are you black? Are you old? Are you young? The state thrives on a paradigm of difference. Number 1. Number 2, the state thrives on a paradigm of war. It goes to war with its people. It puts its people at war against each other. The state was created by war, sustained by war, and it uses violence to control its citizens. Then there is the will to power. Everything is about power. There is no consensus. The state does not use consensus. It does not want to hear anything that is called consensus. They want to use power. So we see that the problem that we are facing in Africa is not that of one another, but it is the problem of this institution which is called the state. Allow me to use a a brief example. It's like a problematic bus. Then what do? You stop the bus, you throw away the bus driver, you throw away the conductor, you replace them with a black driver and a black conductor. The passengers remain the same, the bus remains the same, the road remains the same, the destination remains the same. We are not moving an inch, Program Director. Thank you very much.
Now the engine remains the same, and the model of the bus remains the same. The type of fuel it consumes remains the same.
Just because we have put a driver who looks like us.
It doesn't. No, I'm with you. So that is a concept of the unique state. I've got a hand here, and I think it's from one of my colleagues in the administration, and if I'm not mistaken, is Comrade Simpiwe Hashe. Comrade Hashe, can you make your input?
No, thanks, Comrade Nodoba, and thanks to the two professors for their inputs and very enlightening information. I just wanted to check with the two professors. There's a sense in which one thinks that these African leaders have control over the means of the economy, but are not in control of the economy itself. You refer to the fact that we have palladium and we have other minerals that we control. And those are means to economic activity, and those are means to economy, but we don't have control over economy itself, largely because of the influence of neocolonialism in Africa. And checking the impact of the de-dollarization, the impact of global economy. The interesting thing about globalization, it remains global insofar as it does not impact or it does not pain those who are in charge of the so-called leaders of the West. And once the leaders of the West are pained, like the US is pained by the war in Russia, it stops and becomes more nationalism, as against globalization. And each nation state looks after its own interests. And we saw that with the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, that each nation looks after itself. I'm just checking with the professors whether it is, you keep saying, all of these things are in control of the leadership of Africa, and whether it would be possible for African scholarship to influence the thinking towards, Africans thinking for themselves about, their nationhood, their economy. And to what extent can African scholarship help in dealing with the impact of neocolonialism in Africa? Because we are owned by those who control capital. They own our thinking and they own everything. In as much as you say, I hear you say, no, we can influence this or that, but without capacity to influence, how do we do so? And to what extent can African scholarship help in ensuring that, there is solidarity in thinking by Africans? I mean, a typical example is the map that you showed, where the majority of African countries abstain from voting. And, one would say, those who are abstaining are actually supportive of the status quo and not necessarily abstaining, So if you can just comment on that, I would appreciate. Thanks.
Thank you, Comrade Hashe. My guests, it's up to you who wants to go first. And you can even interchange as your answer.
No, let me go first. Let me go first. I think my colleague will follow suit. And I think we can only answer this question based on my own experience on this. And this is why in creating that context for this conversation, I have insisted on the example of being infantile and being infantilized and African leaders accepting that. I've also made reference to the fact that we are quite eager to become the spokespeople for these hegemonies. because there's always this perception that, Black people, you always have the one who wants to be the head Negro in charge. It's one thing to be all Negroes, but they must be the one who is the first professor in the township, who is the first what. He's the head Negro. I am a little different to the rest of that. And so it is only when we realize that the positions that we find ourselves in as academics and as the middle class are in themselves, by nature of their existence, problematic. So I'm saying I am as much a problem in the fact that I am a university teacher and I am part of the Black middle class, because it is usually this class that is the biggest problem, because it feels it has got too much to lose. And I mean, you would not get these kinds of sentiments for people who've got nothing to lose, but for the middle class who feel that they have been promoted to where they are the ones who you would never see leading revolutions. Now, let me make this example just to back up this thing. So this past week at UNISA, we had the visit from the Council of Higher Education, coming to check whether our qualifications are aligned and stuff like that. And then the chairperson of this committee at one point made a reference to, well, this decolonial thing of yours is a little bit problematic and stuff like that. Now, you can understand that. These are Black people who are part of the system, and it's quite easy for them to say, if it is Black or if it says decolonial, it assumes that you are saying the rest must not exist. And that is not even what we're saying, but there is not an inclination to hear us out holistically what it is that we are saying. Every time when we propose things, people are saying, well, we go to the extremes. Is this what you're meaning? We're not saying that. We're saying, let's acknowledge the problem that we find ourselves in. And when we acknowledge the problem, that we are the ones that become the spokespeople of this system, then maybe we can have a bigger conversation. My deputy in my secretariat here in AZAPO tends to want to always says, we have to be careful that we're not just reformists. We must acknowledge that the system is a problem. And South Africa, as it is governed, is a problem. And we, as a political organization, as AZAPO, we must acknowledge it is a problem. Because then we would want to do all kinds of nice things and not deal with a problem that continues to be perennial. It's like saying, I want to go and take clothes to the Salvation Army. You go to your drawer, you take out only the things that you want to give them. But the proper way would be to say, go to your drawer, take everything out, put them on the bed, put the drawer back, and put in the good things that you think you have here. And then the rest you can give away. So it's the question of how do we do these kinds of things? But I want to make the point is, we are the problem. And we have to acknowledge and start a conversation with that we are, especially the learned ones, the middle class Black people, we are the problem.
Thanks very much for the question, and thank you, Professor Tshaka, for a very solid response. We are the problem because of self-hate. We are the problem because we were trained by coloniality to hate one another. This is one of the fruits of the system of the homelands, where the homeland became embedded in our mentality, such that if I meet another Black person in Diepsloot, as a Black person, I must have the anger on behalf of the system to say, you don't belong to Diepsloot, but you belong to Harare, you belong to Bulawayo. That is the actualization of what was meant to be the effect of the Bantu state. It was not merely the erection of geographical boundaries. It was the creation of episteme, of a way of thinking in our minds that was rooted in a very confined way of thinking that says, if you look somehow different from me, then you are a problem. Two Black people will meet. Where are you from? Oh, I am from Zimbabwe and I'm from South Africa. You are a foreigner. And if I'm from South Africa, oh, which part of South Africa are you from? I'm from Guyana, and you, I'm from KwaZulu-Natal. Oh, so you are not Zulu like me. But if you are Zulu like me, which you are Zulu from where? I'm a Zulu from Soweto and I'm a Zulu from eThekwini. Oh, you are not Zulu enough if you are a Zulu from Joburg. If you are both from eThekwini, But which part of eThekwini are you from? I am from Itopo, I am from Umzimkulu. No, you are not from my village. It is a slippery slope that coloniality took us and placed us. So what we are simply doing is that we are gliding through that slippery slope. Where are our leaders? Our leaders are in three particular categories. What happened is that there is a first group of leaders that was assimilated. It was absorbed into whiteness. This is where you see a politician going to a rural area and speaking in English. Then you know that they are speaking to a global audience. They are speaking to their masters. They were assimilated. Those leaders that tried to be different were disciplined. Those that were radical, those that were with the people, those leaders that said, I will eat last, I will stand last in the queue, they were dispensed. And we can actually put all our African leaders on a scale to see whether they were absorbed by the system, whether they were dispensed by the system, or whether they were disciplined by the system. And we now know why certain leaders are characterized as the darling of the West, why certain leaders are castigated, and why there was this mantra that Muammar Gaddafi must die at whatever cost, because he had challenged the hegemony of the United States dollar and say, this currency is not worth the paper that it is written on. In Africa, we do not have just leaders. In Africa, the leaders that we have, I do not want to use the word self-centered, but the leaders that we have in Africa are not leading us to liberation, but they are leading us to the slaughterhouse.
Okay, no, thank you, Prof. But you see, I think Comrade Ashe spoke about, even though you talk about the three categories of the leaders, but now here it is, South Africa reaching platinum together with Zimbabwe. They can partner with Russia. South Africa reaching palladium. But we are in political office. We are supposed to be in control of these. But we don't have people who are active participants with the necessary wherewithal in terms of expertise of participating in that economic space, in mining and so on and whatever. Now, the point that he's trying to bring, that I think he says we need to address, is to then say, how will then this work for us? Because we've got people that have got political power, but it would appear as if that political power does not translate or doesn't have the potential to translate into economic power and economic self-reliance. In other words, we've got political power, but that makes you to believe that you also have got economic power, but in the real sense, you don't have economic power. How do we deal with the dilemma, Professor? You are on mute, just like I was, Prof.
Yeah, how the system works is such that, let's use the example of palladium.
Yes.
When the system realizes that Africa has got a mineral that is indispensable to the global economy, they look at the structure of the black government, the black ruling class. Then they select a few that they then assimilate into their ranks. Instead of the mines in the Northwest working for the people in the Northwest, there are a few people, there are a few among us who then act like native informers. They then take that which was supposed to be enjoyed by the nation, they then make it themselves. This is why in Africa we've got islands of very rich people, like the president, Cyril Ramaphosa. How did he become very rich? When he was at Teflop University, he joins the Workers' Union. He was supposed to be representing the workers. How do we logically explain his movement from the representative of the miners to the richest person in the country? So how the system works is that it will target certain individuals in the value chain and assimilate them. This is why I spoke about those three categories. You are disciplined, you are assimilated, or you are dispensed. if I can be bold enough, I can then say what masquerades as a black rich class, as the black elite, are actually those that were assimilated, those that were absorbed by capital. Chair, I used to wonder about why Western countries waste their money giving us scholarships. There's that scholarship, you go and study there. The scholarship is the most evil thing for Africans. It takes our most intelligent people. It takes them away from us epistemologically and geographically. You are trained at Oxford, you are trained at whatever university. When you come back, you are no longer one of us in every sense. You are now a native informer. Now, because we trust you, we saw you as a brilliant person, as one of the most intelligent people in the village. When you come back after 5 years, we listen to you, yet you are now poisoning the whole system. And this is how, as Africa, we have been regressing year by year by year by year by year, because it is those, the brightest among us, that are targeted by the system. Then they are poisoned, and then they are planted back at the Reserve Bank. They are planted back in the Ministry of Finance. And before we realize it, we are now using Western-centric economic concepts, economic thinking, that the budget must be incremental. What incremental budget? The budget of the University of Venda is a fraction of the University of Cape Town. Now, if you say we give all universities a 10% incremental of their budget, the 10% incremental at UCT is almost the whole budget for the University of Venda. So the technocrats that come to take over were actually not taking over on our behalf, but they were actually trained to maintain the status quo.
I hear you, Professor, and I'm tempted to go on this matter, but I see here is a member from the audience who threw something in the chat. But maybe before I get there, and I want Professor Tshaka also to come in here, this thing of us in academia being the problem, the so-called middle class, because Prof, like you had indicated, we might have imbibed the epistemology that is oriented around the Eurocentric basis. No, I hear all that, right? But now, Comrade Tshaka and Comrade Benyera, look, these middle-class academics and other middle-class members of society, they did not create the system.
Yes.
They find themselves in the system. So why are they the only ones that are actually being singled out, right? In other words, we say they must commit what we call in our circles as a class suicide. But now, if they commit class suicide, what are the alternatives? Right? They have invested time through what we call poison because of the epistemology that they have actually imbibed. But the problems are systemic. So why should we single them out when we actually admit that we have inherited and we are running with a problematic system? Shouldn't it be the responsibility of all levels of society to be able to deal with the systemic problem? And then once you answer that, I'll come to what the member of the audience is saying.
Kaya, it's a nice thing to be on the other side of the table, ask the difficult questions. No, but I think they're very important questions when I'm Kaya. They're very important questions, but I think I'm pushing that point very strongly because I guess it needs to be some point that we acknowledge. Now, of course, maybe there are some other parts that I'm being unfair about that. But you see, the thing is, Mkaya, the masses look at us in a love-hate relationship. They love us because they hope that they can escape the pangs of poverty and all of that by becoming like us. But they hate us because we speak on their behalf, yet we don't share the struggles that we have graduated from, because we are not as organic as we used to be. I mean, I might be coming from Richie, but I have graduated from that in a sense that I'm working at university. So So when I speak, I need to have a disclaimer to say, even though I speak about these issues, I am not embedded in these issues again. The problem is we are a bit not fair when we speak as passionately as we are, because we have to acknowledge, even when we speak about blackness, that to a certain degree, we in these positions, we might be black, but we are not as organic as we used to be. But it's important that you get people rallying around that, so that we can get to mobilize as communities. Now, when I speak about these issues, which I write about, my whole life I do about these issues, is that I always say, in as much as I come from this community, it is important that we acknowledge that by virtue of being in the university, I am part of the problem. So the university, therefore, has got the owners of the universities. Like, let me use the word castle that Dwight Hopkins used. When they speak of a university, it says Black theologians are part of the problem, in that even if you are the worker of this castle, it tends to change your perception and your attitude towards the masses. We also see them, even the workers at the university, they wear different kinds of clothes. They come to the universities are wearing properly, and then you see they have got their uniform, because it's the perception. The castle tends to influence how you behave. And so we have to acknowledge that this is the system that creates this problem. And by virtue of being part of that, you are therefore also a problem. You can't be saying that men are abusive, but you as a man don't want to be part of the problem of men. You're part of that. Masculinity and all of the history that comes with that has created that and has justified that over time. So if the university in Africa was never meant to be a university in Africa and of Africa, we have to acknowledge that.
Okay, so Mkhaya, you are saying we speak from a point of privilege, and the issue that caused a bit of problems even in the ruling party by one minister is that we are house niggers. Is that where we are going?
We have to acknowledge that.
No, look, Mkhaya, I hear you, and I hear Professor Benyera. I hear both of you. Now, what is the solution?
Well, the solution starts with acknowledging it first. I think we are too quick, and we unfairly want solutions to difficult problems. And every time when someone says to me, well, I've heard you belabor this issue, but what is the solution? You're being unfair, because this is a difficult and complicated problem that starts by us acknowledging parts of this problem, so that we can collectively then get a proper and really adequate response to a problem that we both acknowledge is a problem. I'm not so concerned about the solution. I'm more concerned about us acknowledging that we're part of the problem, and so that we can collectively find solutions towards that.
Prof. Benyera, do you want to take a bite on that, or should I go to my next input?
Chairperson, a wound is not a problem, but an indication of a problem. If you listen to Oliver Mtukudzi, he was alluding to the fact that the biggest killer in Africa is the anadine. Because if you have got a headache, you take a Panadol, then your head stops aching. But the head aching is a symptom of something not correct with the system of the body. Okay. And by shooting the messenger, which is the headache, you are leaving the problem of something that is wrong within your system going on. So, as a Black person, I live a triple epistemology.
Okay.
I am a product of British colonialism. I am a Black Shona man. As I am speaking to you today, who is speaking to you? Is it Everisto Benyera, the Black Shona man from some village in Goko in Zimbabwe? Or it is this associate professor of African politics who is published with many European publishers? So I live a double episteme. I am an African on one hand, and I am a colonial product on one hand. And what determines my location on that extreme is not always something that I am conscious about. So I am answering here, Comrade Temba Zulu, that the middle class is not only the problem, but also the peasants, the people with blue collar jobs, and everybody. But as a middle class person, I blame myself and those with me in this economic space because we understand the system better. We understand the system better than the cleaners at the university. So we must be brave enough to take that responsibility of leading the dismantling of the system. I am learning here from Audre Lorde, who said, let's use the master's tool to destroy the master's house. But again, we must always be aware that one of the biggest challenges is that we live a double, if not a triple epistemology. If you look at our white counterparts, they are just Afrikaners, full stop. They don't have any other thinking way. There are times when I think in Shona, I translate to English. When it comes out in English, it's something that is very horrible, but that is not what I meant to do. These are the burdens of colonialism. Okay. Let me end there.
Okay, no, thank you very much. I think Comrade Thembazulu is answered. Then Comrade Nospiwe Manona raises a very important issue as well. While you are at that, Prof, and I'm sure you can see it, she points out the issue, and I think here maybe one can say, what can we learn? Like, look what is happening with Russia and Ukraine, but now look what Russia and collaborate together to do what? To get at the master's house, which is the Petrol Dollar or the de-dollarization. All right. Now she is alluding to something similar. Towards the end, she says, can we start redeeming Azania brick by brick in our lifetime? Is that possible? While all our leaders are doing all the sorts of things that she's talking about there, which I think you've gone through and read. What would your reaction be to that, Prof? I think you are on mute.
You. Yes, thank you very much, Comrade Nosfiwe Manona. The biggest challenge is the university, because what we are doing at the university, and I'm part of the problem, is to miseducate our people. We need to uneducate ourselves so that as we do what Comrade Thembazulu said, that we need to continuously educate ourselves. We should actually do that, continually educate ourselves, not continually miseducate ourselves. This is why Biko was always agitating for these corners where the black race must meet to share our experiences like what we are doing today. So for me, the immediate task is to seize those like-minded among us that do not need to be converted to Azanianness, those that believe in Azania, those that you do not need to explain what Azania means, so that we can say, let's form a critical mass. Let's shine in our corners. Let's identify the most topical issues to address. Let's contribute to the debate. If there is something that is being said, let one of us be there and say, I am from Azania. I believe that as the black race, we must not fight each other, but we must look at those that took the land, those that are like the people in Stellenbosch. Those are our real enemies. Let's assist each other build genuine African solidarity. Not to legislate solidarity, but to put it in our hearts and in our minds, because that is exactly what we are missing as the black race in Africa, to identify with ourselves.
Comrade Tshaka, I see you are nodding in agreement.
I
But anyway, it's fine. I don't want to put you on the spot.
I like this conversation, Comrade Mkaya, because I think it hits home. Yes, I think Azania can we can redeem that brick by brick if we have a multi-pronged approach. Now, Prof. Benyera has said what could be done, but many things must happen at the same time.
Okay.
Many things must happen at the same time. We can't have a linear approach to that, but many things must happen at the same time. But part of what must happen is also us deciding what it is that we want. You see, the problem I've learned from my experience, and I'm hoping that people can, from where they are located, use this example to speak to that. Now, we're speaking from an academic space and speaking of the challenges that we get there. And in as much as we are seen to be working against the system, there are certain things that show that you are part of the system. And I'm hoping we can also in politics see that we will get to a point where we agree that the trajectory that we have set out as AZAPO is not going to get us where we can brick by brick bring this Azania to 8 mass. Okay. And I want to say that again. We will get to a point where we say what the trajectory that we want to head on, if this is the Azania that we want, we won't get it. Because it takes for us to say, why are you here? Why are you in AZAPO? And why are you not elsewhere? And it cannot be that people can just say anyone is the same. It can't be like that.
Okay.
But also there's a number of things that will count in your interest or against your interest for doing that. Are we in a position to accept that? Because it won't come easy. You see, there will be sacrifices. And that's why it's very important that each and every time I hear people saying, your talk on blackness make me uncomfortable, I get uncomfortable for that. Because I am here because precisely I believe that it is not by chance that Black people across the globe are subjected to the kind of inhumanity as they are. And it has got nothing to do with a divine decree, but it's a man-made thing, you see. So I'm saying we can do that, but we must decide whether we want to do that or not, Mkai.
Okay, no, thanks, Mkai. I think our time, this is a really rich topic. And Professor Benyera and Professor Tshaka, I'm just getting communication throughout, even I think from Facebook and so on, people saying, this is a very educative and rich input. And it's not that we are not asking questions, but we are busy digesting this particular matter, right? As you can see, Professor Benyera, one question is just popping in now. But I would have said, but we don't have time, but I think it's something that we can reflect upon. You talked about the idea of because of the anger that is there in South Africa, of the Azanians, the way to go, political organizations and parties, the so-called smaller organizations or parties are going to become what you call the power brokers. And maybe because of the situation that it is, we need to be looking at developing what you called coalition frameworks. So organizations like AZAPO need to be looking into that now that we're moving towards 2024, because what you also raise is the issue of the instability of the coalitions, right? They are there, there is some instability in them. But then the other issue that you raised at a global level is the issue that is very important, and I think it's fundamental to this whole particular discussion of today: the role of the United Nations Security Council, the double standards. And you used a very interesting concept, I'll try to get it here, about the issue of the rule of law and the rule for law, something like that, right? So the issue of the United Nations having to either be reformed or to be done away with. It's a very radical approach. The question might be, which platforms do we use? We are divided as a continent, like you show us. We must call for that. The last point that you raised is South Africa as a unifier from the BRICS countries because of the stance that you took and the perspective that you brought in about what does neutrality mean. And this, which is in the media and the narrative that basically demonizes neutrality. And AZAPO had even indicated when this whole thing started to say, let the country not get involved in this war, even though it might have implications, but let us not get involved. And it was speaking to that power of the neutrality that you talked about. So just in 1 minute or so, Prof. Benyera, as you look at what we have there, why is it that Black people are treated the same way across the globe, right? The things that you talked about the double standards, particularly with Poland and so on. If you can just close for us, and then your closing remarks, we'll get a closing remarks of Professor Tshaka, and then we will call it an afternoon.
Thank you very much, Program Director, for the opportunity, and thank you for the audience for the opportunity to share and for listening to me. I posed that question there as a parting shot and as a way of unifying the Black race, that if there is anything that is going to unify us, it is actually the question as to why a Black person is treated exactly the same way in Poland, in California, in Australia, everywhere where the Black person is across the globe, the Black person is treated exactly in the same way. Is that not a good enough rallying point for us as the Black race? Instead of us chasing a Zimbabwean from a meeting in Diepsloot, why didn't we chase the two ministers whose two ministries are the ones that are supposed to provide safety and security, and they're supposed to document the immigrants? We were chasing the wrong person. Thank you very much, colleagues.
No, thank you very much, Professor Benyera. Professor Tshaka, for closing remarks.
Takazo Mufokeng once said recently, it is difficult to love Black people because of the things that happen that they are allowed to do because they are desperate. And I think I'm a sucker for Black people. You know, I really think we're not doing enough to really plow back to that and really understand that we are given very less options by the condition that we find ourselves in. And that's why I get so irritated when any talk that insists on Blackness is shot down. That why should there be Black unity? Why should this insist on Black? Because you see, the problem is white people don't have to call their things white anymore. But we, because we want that unity, we unfortunately have to insist on Blackness because it is the unifying power. It's the unifying element that brings us together across these categories. So white people can just call a gathering van Wijkse vergadering, and they talk about issues there that has to do with whiteness only. But people would shoot us down because we insist on Blackness. And so I am saying this language that is thrown in like a cat amongst pigeons has to be a language that we sort of try to avoid by any means necessary, because we need to get together as a Black folk if we are going to get some things right in this country or in the world.
Okay. No, thank you very much. And thank you very much, Professor Benyera, by answering that question from Comrade Richard Kanyile about foreign investment. Indeed, foreign investment is a facade. It's actually theft. All right. And then I think I agree with you. To then further say we must pool our resources together and mine our own minerals, farm our own land, work our own land, like AZAPO is saying. And in closing, I want to say this was a very informative session, provocative, thought-provoking, but also robust and very frank and candid on actually addressing the elephant in the room. And one of it was, we should see economic sanctions for what they are. They are a war that has been declared. No cosmetic and sugarcoating it. It is like that. War, economic sanctions must be declared as a war against the people. The West practices double standards, but there is a role that South Africa can play. Maybe AZAPO might think of a campaign. South Africa can become a unifier, like we've indicated. Thank you very much, colleagues. And this brings us to the end of the session. Until next time, when we meet each other again in a very interesting session as well.
Ooh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Listen, the struggle was not red. I experienced it, being deprived, being oppressed, even confused. It's enough now, we're taking the power back. We're stronger than before, we cry prouder, too strong. The worst is over. From Cape to Cairo, I'm Morocco to